Today we are looking at a case from the first part of the 20th century, so sit back as we go to England. William Whitley was born on the 29th of September 1831 in the village of Purston in Yorkshire, which is between the towns of Wakefield and Pontefract. His father was a successful corn dealer, and due to his work, had little to do with William's upbringing. Instead, William was brought up in the household of an uncle. In the mid-19th century, no system of compulsory education existed, and most children from working class or trading families attended school for only a few years before entering the workforce. William's father, however, recognised that his children needed a solid foundation to succeed. He enrolled William into the local school, though the environment was far from ideal. These institutions were typically small independent operations, run by a single master or mistress. The curriculum consisted of reading, writing and arithmetic, as well as religious studies. The classrooms were often overcrowded, discipline was strict, and books were in short supply. For many, education was simply preparation for work, and it ended as soon as a child was considered to be more useful elsewhere. William left school in 1845 at the age of 14, which was quite typical for the time. He went to work on his uncle's farm. Agricultural labour was demanding, with long days, but William worked hard. He did have ambitions to become a veterinary surgeon, as in 1844 veterinary medicine had achieved formal recognition when a royal charter had established the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, which distinguished scientifically trained veterinary surgeons from the traditional farriers and other animal healers, many of whom relied on inherited practices and experience rather than formal study. He worked on the farm until the year 1848, when his family arranged for him to enter an apprenticeship with Harnow and Glover, the largest drapery business in Wakefield. Such apprenticeships were binding agreements, and they provided a thorough grounding in a trade. A draper's work involved far more than selling cloth. It required knowledge of fabrics, careful handling of stock, accuracy of accounts, and a good relationship with customers. William seemed to very much like this work, and soon learned how a successful business operated. Wakefield, however, was now no longer the strong centre of the woolen trade it once had been. Although markets and shops still brought much activity to its streets, the larger industrial towns were beginning to overtake it. For a young man with ambition, Wakefield offered experience, but there were better opportunities elsewhere. In 1851, William travelled to London to visit the Great Exhibition, which was held in the vast glass structure known as the Crystal Palace. This had been organised to display the achievements of industry and craftsmanship from Britain and across the world. Inside its enormous iron and glass framework were thousands of items, including machinery, textiles, manufactured goods, and decorative objects, all arranged for public view. For visitors, it was an opportunity to see the range of what modern industry could produce, but for William, it suggested something more. Here was an immense collection of goods, all gathered in one place, yet none of them could be purchased. He began to form the idea that such variety, if brought together in a single establishment and offered for sale, could transform the way people shopped. Instead of many small shops, there might be one large store where everything could be found. When William finished his apprenticeship, he left his employment, and with £10 in his pockets, he set out for London, intending to make his way in trade. By the mid-1850s, London had grown into the largest city in the world, with a population of nearly 3 million people. Thousands came each year from the countryside in search of work, but employment was varied and often insecure, and while some found positions in trade, manufacturing or domestic service, many more relied on casual labour, street selling, or poorly paid workshop employment. William, however, found a position with the firm R. Whiteley and Company, who had a large store on Ludgate Hill. He then moved to Morrison and Dillon, another well-established drapers, where he gained a thorough knowledge of doing business in London, in stores much busier than the one he had worked in Wakefield. During this time, he lived within his means. He did not drink or smoke, and kept his personal expenses as low as possible. This allowed him to put aside a considerable sum. By the early 1860s, he had saved £700, a substantial amount for a young man of modest beginnings, and enough for him to go into business on his own. In 1863, he opened a small fancy goods and drapery shop at 31 Westbourne Grove in Bayswater. The business began on a small scale, with 2 young women serving customers and a boy employed to run errands. It was a simple arrangement, but one that allowed him to keep costs under control while establishing his business. Not long after opening, he married one of his assistants, a young lady named Miss Harriet Sarah Hall. At the outset, the choice of location caused some concern among his friends. Some advised him that Westbourne Grove was not a good location for a new shop. However, the business began to grow steadily. William paid much attention to presentation and pricing. He marked his goods clearly, avoiding the need for bargaining, and arranged his window displays with care so as to attract passing trade. Rather than aiming for large margins, he was content with smaller profits on a greater volume of sales, a method that gradually built a loyal customer base. As trade increased, so did the size of the operation. Within a few years, he acquired a neighbouring premises, and by 1875, he had secured a continuous line of shop fronts all along Westbourne Grove. He had turned what had begun as a single shop into a much larger concern. His method of offering a very wide range of products at competitive prices meant that his shop appealed to the wider public, and he was able to expand to include departments that were unusual for the time, among them sections for meat and vegetables, as well as imported goods from East Asia. In doing this, he moved towards the idea of a single establishment where customers could obtain almost anything they required. The expansion, however, did not go unnoticed. Other shopkeepers in the area saw his growing enterprise as a threat, particularly as he continued to expand his premises and draw in more customers. On the 5th of November 1876, a date celebrated in Britain as Guy Fawkes Night, crowds gathered in the street with a figure dressed as a draper, which was paraded and burned on a bonfire, and was a clear sign of hostility towards his methods and success. In 1899, his enterprise reached a new stage when it was converted into a public limited company, with William Whitley remaining the majority shareholder. He was now able to secure both capital for expansion and continued to be able to influence the company's direction. However, despite his success in business, William Whiteley's personal life was far from straightforward. A young man named Horace George Rayner believed that he was Mr. Whiteley's illegitimate son. Horace George Rayner was born in April 1879 at Teddington near London, and his father listed on his birth certificate was Mr. George Rayner, who had worked as a commission agent in the City of London and had once lived with Horace's mother, a woman named Emily Turner. Emily had a sister, Louisa Turner, who had previously worked in a shop owned by William Whitley. Horace had been educated at schools in Eastbourne and Barnet, and after completing his education, Mr. George Rayner secured him a position in Russia, where he remained for several years. He returned to England and married a young lady named Miss Knowles in 1901, but later went back to Russia, before again returning to London in March 1906. However, at this point, he found himself in a poor financial situation. He struggled to find steady work, fell into debt, and began pawning his belongings, while making repeated but unsuccessful attempts to obtain employment. By December 1906, his financial matters had become so strained that his wife, who was pregnant with their 3rd child, took their 2 children and went to stay with her aunt in the countryside. By now, Horace was in a particularly bad way. He moved into lodgings at Roton House in Hammersmith, and on the 3rd of January 1907, he took a room at a small private hotel in Red Lion Street. However, he still failed to find work, and in the days that followed, his circumstances became more desperate. On the 23rd of January, he visited a gunsmith's shop near the Strand and purchased a quantity of revolver cartridges. The following morning, he left the hotel and went to Mr. William Whiteley's private house in Porchester Terrace, but on arriving there, he was told that business matters were dealt with at Mr. Whiteley's offices in Westbourne Grove. He went there, stopping at the pub along the way. Although he had no appointment to see Mr. Whiteley, in order to sound convincing, he told the staff that he had come on behalf of Sir George Lewis, a very well-known and respected London solicitor who specialised in discreet and often sensitive legal matters. Once the name was given to Mr. Whiteley, Mr. Rayner was admitted to his private office. After about 20 minutes, the 2 men emerged. Mr. Rayner was talking, but Mr. Whiteley did not seem to be listening and instructed his assistant to call for a policeman. At that point, Mr. Rayner, who was still talking, drew a revolver and fired 2 shots at Mr. Whiteley. The elderly gentleman then fell to the floor, and as he did, Mr. Rayner turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. Staff rushed out to fetch a policeman and called for an ambulance. The scene was chaotic, but it was apparent that Mr. Whiteley was dead and Mr. Rayner was badly injured. Police soon arrived, and Detective Inspector Fuller took control of the situation. Despite Mr. Rayner's injuries, Inspector Fuller searched him and found a small leather notebook with 2 pages torn out. On one of the pages he had written, "To whom it may concern, Mr. Whiteley was my father. He has brought upon himself and me this double tragedy by refusing a perfectly reasonable request. Rest in peace." Mr. Rayner was then transported to Paddington Hospital. The newspapers reported the shooting, and it quickly captured the public attention. A prominent business owner, shot dead by a young man claiming to be his son, raised as many questions as it did headlines. As more details emerged, interest only deepened. An inquest was held, after which Mr. Horace Rayner was found to have murdered Mr. William Whitley and was committed for trial at the Old Bailey. The trial began in May 1907, and Horace pleaded not guilty, relying on a defence of temporary insanity. In his attempt to end his own life, he had been blinded in one eye, and this drew some sympathy from the public. Throughout the proceedings, he maintained that William Whitley was his real father, something that stood in stark contrast to Mr. Whiteley's public reputation as a respected and distinguished businessman. In the dock, Horace was calm, but whenever the question of his parentage was raised, he always leaned forward, as if to listen more closely. The prosecutor, Mr. Sims, stated that he was fully prepared to deal with the issue, and if it was seriously claimed that the accused was Mr. Whiteley's son, he said that he could present strong evidence to show that there was no basis at all for the claim. The press had reported that Mr. Whiteley had been subjected to blackmail, but these claims were dismissed as no supporting evidence was produced. When George Rayner, the man who brought Horace up, gave evidence, the court became silent. He said that he was not the child's biological father and stated that Horace's mother, Emily Turner, had registered the birth under his name and that he had permitted this arrangement at the time. There was further sensation when Louisa Turner, the sister of Horace's mother, entered the witness box. She said that her sister Emily had worked as a nursemaid in London, and at the age of 18 she had met George Rayner, and that she later went to live with him. She told the court that her sister had given birth to 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and looking at the judge, she said that Mr. George Rayner had at times questioned whether the children were his, but despite his scepticism, Emily had managed to persuade him to accept them, including the youngest boy, Horace. Murmurs and whispers could be heard in the courtroom, but Louisa continued. She said that she and her sister both knew William Whitley, as she had found a position in the toy department at Whiteley's store, and soon after starting, she had attracted Mr. Whiteley's attention. She said that he began taking her out, giving her gifts, and showing her favour. She went on to say that along with her sister, she would spend time with Mr. Whiteley and Mr. Rayner, and that they would often travel to Brighton at weekends. After a slight pause, she said that in 1881, Mrs. Whiteley discovered that her husband was having a relationship with her, and Mrs. Whiteley left him. By now the courtroom was completely silent. It was as if everyone wanted to hear what Louisa Turner would say next, and they were not disappointed. Miss Turner said that afterwards, Mr. Whiteley paid for her to live in a house in Finchley, and later a home in Kilburn, where she claimed she stayed for several years. She said that in 1885 she gave birth to a son who she named Cecil, and that Mr. Whiteley was the father. When asked about the defendant's claim to be the son of Mr. Whiteley, she replied that as a child, Horace often saw Mr. Whiteley, and as he grew older, he began to form his own ideas about who his father was. She said that the friendship between William Whitley and George Rayner eventually broke down, and although they had once been close, they then seemed to very much dislike each other. When she was asked by the counsel why this was, she replied that she believed it was due to jealousy. Murmurs could be heard in the courtroom as Louisa Turner continued. She said that Mr. Whiteley ended their relationship in 1888, but provided her with a yearly allowance, and that at around the same time, her sister and George Rayner also separated. Before stepping down, she told the court that in 1894, when Horace was about 14, he went to live with George Rayner, and it was then that doubts about his parentage were put into his mind. She said that when drinking, George Rayner would sometimes tell him that he was not really his son, and that he should look to William Whitley for support. She believed that over time, Horace came to think that he might be Mr. Whiteley's illegitimate child. Following this, Horace George Rayner entered the witness box. He spoke calmly as he described what happened on the 24th of January. He said that he believed that William Whiteley was his father, and that as he had been in serious financial difficulty, he had gone to ask him for help. He said that when that appeal failed, he felt he had nothing left, and had already decided that if he was refused, he would take his own life. According to Horace, he took out a revolver and told Mr. Whiteley that he intended to shoot himself. He said that Mr. Whiteley did not believe him and called for a policeman. Horace said that at that point he lost control, and in anger he fired the shots that killed Mr. Whiteley before turning the gun on himself. When he was asked why he believed that Mr. Whiteley was his father, he said that for many years he had accepted George Rayner to be his father. However, he remembered that as a child he had seen Mr. Whiteley at his house where he lived, even at breakfast on some occasions, though he did not know why he was there. He said that he also remembered later seeing Mr. Whiteley in Brighton with his mother and George Rayner. However, after that he was sent away to school and did not see Mr. Whiteley again during those years. Speaking in a calm voice, he said that when he was about 15, he lived with George Rayner in London, but his mother had left the house. He said that Mr. Rayner would often tell him that he was not really his son, and even told him that he ought to go and see Mr. William Whitley, as he might have a stronger claim on him. He told the court that he did not do that, and instead went to work in various positions, including time spent in Russia. He said that later he tried to support himself in business, but without success, and claimed that by 1906 his situation had worsened, as he had no steady employment, had pawned many of his belongings, and on some days went without proper food. He said that his state of mind had suffered, and at Christmas he had already thought about ending his life, but lacked the means to do so. He told the court that before his mother's death, she told him that if he were ever in need, he should go to Mr. Whiteley and mention her name. Now speaking more slowly, he said that in desperation, he eventually decided to go, and had concluded that if he was refused help, he would end his life by his own hand. He admitted to having had several drinks before going to the office, and that he had taken steps to conceal his identity, as he did not want his family to be affected by the scandal. He said that when he finally met Mr. Whiteley, he told him directly who he was and why he had come. He explained his situation and asked for help, particularly in finding work. He said that Mr. Whiteley listened, but refused to involve himself, suggesting instead that he seek assistance elsewhere. Horace said he was angered by what he saw as a lack of feeling, so told Mr. Whiteley that he intended to kill himself and produced a revolver, but Mr. Whiteley seemed unconcerned and just told him to put it down before he went to call for help. Horace said that he followed him and tried to continue the conversation, but when Mr. Whiteley sent for a policeman, he felt he could not go on and fired. The defence followed this dramatic testimony by introducing medical witnesses who told the court that in their opinion, Horace Rayner committed the acts in a state of temporary insanity. However, when cross-examined, these expert medical witnesses sounded somewhat unconvincing. Sir George Lewis also gave testimony, and although at first he tried to be evasive, he did confirm that in the past he had acted on behalf of Mr. Whiteley. The press reported all the court proceedings, and the public seemed particularly fascinated by the events. However, despite the compelling nature of the testimony in the case, the jury ultimately rejected the defence's arguments. Horace George Rayner was found guilty of murder, and the judge sentenced him to death. The case, however, did not end there. In the days that followed, a petition for clemency was organised, which quickly gained public support, collecting over 200,000 signatures within the first week. The scale of the response reflected the extent to which the case had captured the public attention. With public opinion running so strongly, the Home Secretary intervened and commuted Horace's sentence from death to life imprisonment. 36 hours after he had been reprieved, Horace's wife gave birth to their third child, a baby girl. William Whiteley's estate was valued at around £1 million, an immense fortune for the period. Part of his wealth was later used to establish Whiteley's Village, a charitable retirement community near Walton-on-Thames, which was intended to provide accommodation for those in need. His 2 sons from his marriage to Harriet Sarah Hall continued to run the business and managed to maintain its position of one of London's major retail establishments. In 1912 they opened a new store. However, the family control did not last indefinitely. In 1927, the business was eventually sold to the retail magnate Harry George Selfridge, marking the end of the Whiteley family ownership. Horace George Rayner did not spend life in prison. He served just under 12 years and was released in 1919 on medical grounds. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case